Welcome. It just sounds so exciting to say that to book people at an open book festival that I'm momentarily struck dumb. The last time I was on this stage, I was wearing stockings and high-heel shoes and took a bow at the end of the final performance of the second run of Shakespeare in Love. And then there was a very long and depressing gap between that and this. Welcome to the first session of Open Book. It really is lovely to have Open Book back with people, being able to sit next to people, listening to other people just a few meters away from them, talking about books. I can't think of a better way to start a Friday than that. You have some clues. Oh, no, you don't anymore. The clues have been taken away, so now you have to guess which one of us is. But I'll help you. I'm John Maytham, and the photograph, I don't know where they got this, but I think it was done after I'd been made up for 10 hours for an advertising shoot, because I don't see that when I look in the mirror. On the left of me is Margie Orford, and if I had if I had power, I would have wreaked justice upon her for making us wait a criminally long time before she kept me. Yeah, you see. Yes. And Andrew's book, many of you would have had a chance to read, and I'm sure many of you have read, but Siphiwe's latest book and Margie's new book are books that have only very recently hit the shelves, so I'm not sure that anybody will have had a chance to read them. But Margie's book is called The Eye of the Beholder, and I'm not saying this, I would say this even if I didn't mean it, but I mean it. It's very different from what we were used to from Margie, but different in every best possible sense. It is a story of such power, so evocatively and meaningfully told. It really is very good. Andrew Brown, I don't have to say much about. We all know and love Andrew and his many ventures. You know, he takes off he sort of wakes up in the morning and says, what am I going to be between 6 and 8 this morning? Police reservist? No. Lawyer? No, I'm going to be a writer this morning. And this is the result of that. And then The Quality of Mercy, which is, it's not a trilogy in the sense of one book following on from another book, but it's a trilogy in the sense that it is a book about a country and similar themes, and some of the characters from the earlier books return, and where one was foregrounded by his presence in the previous book to this time he's foregrounded by his absence. We'll get into all of that. They're just such beautiful books, and it makes me so proud that South Africans are writing this wonderful stuff. One of the issues I had while thinking about how to handle this was that I suspect that Margie's book and Andrew's book definitely are going to be in the thriller section of bookshops and libraries. Siphiwe's, I'm not sure. Where do your books usually land up on what shelves? Magic realism, what?
Bestseller, John.
Yes. So there are issues around plot, not issues in the sense that they're problems with the plot, but there are issues in discussing these books without giving away important things that happen as the book develops. So that's something we're going to try to have to navigate.
Just ask the audience to forget everything you hear in the session.
Okay. Forget everything you hear in this session. There we go, except Andrew's witticism, that you can remember and tweet about. We're going to talk until about 11:45, and then I'll open the floor for questions. We do have to finish at 11 because people need to get out and more people need to come in. The authors will be somewhere out there. There will be a signing desk, and please buy your copies and then take them to be signed. Can I perhaps ask, just to go from here to there, how each of you defines the sort of vague themes of the session around power and justice and the law in terms of your general approach to writing, and more particularly in the book that we're discussing this morning. Margie?
Well, in The Eye of the Beholder, I think some of you will remember my Clear Heart series, which was really trying to put society to rights by police procedurals. In fact, Andrew Brown himself featured in one of my books, I think. I needed a police reservist in it. So I just borrowed him. But when I got to the end of the Clear Heart series, I really thought justice does not work for women. it does not work. You go to, say you have a rape trial or something, you don't get justice. So in this book, I've looked at much more the idea of what would a woman's justice look like? What is a kind of feminist justice? And I also realized that the prosecution or punishment for a crime doesn't end the suffering of the trauma victim, the survivor. So I was looking at what happens when a crime never ends. Well, how does that work? I also just stepped right outside of systems of power. The idea of the power and justice will kind of put things to rights. So it sort of sits outside of that. It's a revenge thriller, I suppose, with lots of complexities.
Because there are deaths, there are two historical deaths, and there is a disappearance which might be a death. But there are no lawyers, there is one policeman, but he's not there as a policeman, he's there as a really creepy person. So, I mean, it's completely outside of the criminal justice system. There are no trials, there's no investigation, there's no police docket, there's just a kind of justice.
To me, it was a novel about sin rather than crime, and that sort of exists outside of the narrow definitions that we try and deal with. It's about the psyche, too.
Would you like to say anything about characters, story?
Yes, it's about three women. It starts with a woman called Cora Berger, who's about 50, and then her daughter and another young woman who's been very damaged in her early, I suppose, at the cusp of adolescence. And these three women are linked in ways that they don't quite understand, and the sort of trauma links all of them. I kind of flipped the thriller or the crime novel scenario on its head because there's a man disappears. But somehow, I didn't do this intentionally, but I found, because he disappeared, the female characters had all the agency and the potency of the classical hero. They're moving, they're on this kind of quest, there's a lot of action. But what I was looking at is how trauma or crime plays out through a person's whole life and how then that acts in this very tight, I think it takes place over about 7 days, how that affects the present when they all get together. So it's about mothers and daughters. It was about, I was thinking as well, what happens if we live in a culture that doesn't mother us, patriarchal culture. So a lot was going on.
Andrew, your books are more easily filed in a particular place. They are, I mean, you know, Eberhard February makes another appearance in this book, and it is a book about heists. It is about a criminal gang and the attempt by the authorities to stop that criminal gang from doing these cash-in-transit heists.
Yeah, I think as a lawyer and a policeman, I'm supposed to know what power and justice is about. You would hope so, but in fact I don't. It's such a grey area for me, particularly justice. And I think writing is a way of me personally exploring that concept of where justice lies. So the book is based very loosely on the movie Heat, which is Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. And what I loved about that movie is that you're not sure who you're rooting for. One is a bank robber, one is a cop. They've both got flaws, they've both got human weaknesses, but they're both quite endearing. And throughout the movie, you're not sure who you want to succeed, and you know one of them is going to die in the end. It's a good Hollywood movie, and someone's going to die. And you're not sure until the end who you want that to be. And it intrigues me that all of us in this audience, in this room, think we know what's right and what's wrong. But we'll then watch a Netflix series about a bank robbery, and we want the bank robbers to win because somehow that money belongs to no one. That's the kind of concept we have. That interminable
Spanish series, which never seems to end. Yes.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, no, that you just wanted to end, as opposed to for them to succeed.
Everybody dies. Madrid is blown up. End.
Then you'd be happy. Yeah, so it's intriguing to me, and this evening I'll be interviewing P. Pacifique from Rwanda, where we're going to be talking about exactly the same kinds of things, about why good people commit atrocities in a particular situation and whether we're all capable of doing that. And so what I enjoyed about writing Heist is that it allowed me to explore both sides of what's meant to be a dichotomy. I enjoyed exploring the character of the heist gang, more, in fact, than I enjoyed Eberhard, because Eberhard I feel I know what his values are, I know who he is, but I got to explore the other side of the coin, and I enjoyed that enormously.
Yeah, we'll talk a little more later about the Andi Deqaba, the leader of the Boko Haram heist gang. And Siphiwe, your book is the one of the three in which the concept of justice is most obviously explored. The characters talk about it and what is justice. So what is your approach to justice, to law, to power through your literature and in this book?
So in the 3 books that I've written so far, I think power and abuse of power has been sort of like the thing that I explore the most. But I felt that as a post-colonialist, that the one thing I felt we hadn't grappled with, and I'm from Zimbabwe, is what we want the post-colonial moment to do, right, about the past. Do we want it to be sort of like a vengeful reckoning, or are we looking for true justice? And I think for me, those two things are different, and those two things are often confused one for the other. And I felt like most of the time, this is not something that we actively talk about or discuss or have even tried to, as a nation, excuse me, come to think about critically. So we just act. And I think, especially for a settler colony, a lot of things have happened that do need to be addressed and sometimes redressed. But what does that actually look like? And so the novel takes place within sort of like the in-between moment, right? From a country going from a colonial to a post-colonial power. And exactly what is it that we want in this moment? Do we want justice for what happened, or do we want to just sort of like do an eye for an eye? They did this, we will do this to them. So for me, this is a very important question. Now, what justice is very gray, but I think it's something that we actively have to contend with. And I think this is something that we never did as Zimbabweans, which explains a lot about the situation that the country is in. And I think critically engaging with that question would have helped. Like, what is it exactly that we want to redress and address before we move on as a nation? So that's what the novel...
Because, I mean, I was going to say your main character, but even the tiniest of characters in your books are main characters. It's wonderful. It's one of her many great gifts as a storyteller. She says in her acknowledgements that she owes a lot of her success to her grandmother, who was a storyteller in the best traditions of oral storytelling, and she's taken all of that magic from her grandmother and put it on the pages of books. So you can't really talk about major and minor characters, because even somebody who makes a very brief appearance is given a rich life. But perhaps the main character is Spokes Malloy, who rises just before independence in 1980 to a higher rank in the British South Africa Police and in the CID than any other black person before him. And he volunteered to fight in the Second World War. And they were promised, the black people from then, Rhodesia, were promised that when they got back they would get some land to say thank you for their war efforts. And he got back, and full of naive hope, he presents himself at a government office and says, "Can I have my bit of land, please?" And they go, well, we're going to give the white people some land first, and then there won't be much left after that, and the colored people are then going to get some, but maybe in the future you'll be able to buy some land for yourself. An horrendous injustice, and he responds to it by becoming a policeman in essentially Rhodesia's version of an apartheid police force, because that injustice upon his return from war makes him determined to fight for justice, to fight for the law being observed and people who commit crimes to be brought to account, and he's incredibly successful at it. But he is taken to task, because what's a black man doing serving the white colonial government?
Yeah. And this is something that interests me, because there's a whole way, I think, in, again, post-colonial settings where we, especially for a country like Zimbabwe that had a civil war, where we imagine heroes to be very particular kinds of people. Those are the people who went to fight the war. But what about the people who didn't go to fight the war? What about the people who stayed at home and were trying to do something different? There's a way in which the post-colonial narrative, especially like in Zimbabwe, where we have ZANU and ZAPU being sort of like, those were the two roads, and those were the only things that Black people who were fighting for justice were doing. That's not true. A lot of people actually didn't go to fight that war. A lot of people were policemen or were civil servants in some way, and may have supported the war effort in other ways, but may not have, you know. And I feel like part of what I try to do is to tell the stories of people who've been marginalized or silenced or tried to be erased from history. And I feel like when we have that monolithic understanding of what a hero is, a post-colonial hero, it narrows a lot of the Black experience pre-1980. And so I wanted that also to be something that is explored. Like, he is not what we would call a hero in the sense that we call Zimbabwean war veterans, or used to call Zimbabwean war veterans hero. But he is, as you said, fighting for justice all the time, and he's trying so hard to do the right thing. He's just, maybe in retrospect, will be seen as having been fighting for, in very black and white terms, the wrong side, but I want to muddy that and make it all gray, you know, what is the right side, what is the wrong side.
So, I mean, it's striking about all three books that none of the crimes end up in a court and a sentence is not produced. Yes, Spokes has been incredibly successful over his career in bringing serious criminals to book. But there aren't courtrooms, there aren't verdicts. And the thing, Margie, I'm sure you and I have discussed this when we were talking about the books in the Claire Hart series. We've talked about why people read thrillers, and I'm sure you and I have had the same conversation as well, Andrew. People read thrillers because it cleans messy stuff up in a way that real life doesn't. But you've decided, as you said, to upend that and say no, because we must question these assumptions around what thrillers are supposed to provide, because they don't reflect closely enough the damage that people in the pages of thrillers go through before Detective Tom Thorne finds the bad guy and sends him off to the Old Bailey.
Well, I think with the 5 Claire Hart novels, by the time I got to writing this one, I found that what you could resolve was kind of less and less. It doesn't, people, especially if there's been violence, seeing somebody go to jail, yes, it tidies things up on one level. This book, The Eye of the Beholder, I explored a really simple question, which I'd sort of drilled through 5 novels, of what does it mean to be viewed as an object, a sexual object? What does it mean to be looked at? And I was thinking, I think any woman has had this. Everybody I've spoken to, that moment in which you're just being a normal little girl, you're not aware of being in a body, you're just running around, and then suddenly someone looks at you. It could be a stranger, it could be an uncle, it could be your dad, it could be someone, and you see yourself through their eyes as this transformed thing. And it usually happens even before puberty. And into your cells goes this feeling of shame. And you then, I'm so glad you're nodding like that, but you spend the rest of your life navigating being yourself and seeing yourself. So that's that thing of what it means to be an object, to be a thing, is perhaps at the heart of this book, what it has meant culturally in a patriarchy. And I did get there through peeling off the layers of violence with my Claire Hart quest, which is, why is South Africa so violent? It seems to me the intimacy of the family arrangements around how women are perceived as an object is key to that. So this book was about secrets, and the secrets that women carry on behalf of men, the violence that we take in to ourselves in order to keep things smooth. So you asked me earlier, why such a long wait? I did go a bit mad, I have to say. I think I had a high-functioning breakdown from writing those Claire books, because the thriller form was an accidental form around what I wanted to write, and I just looked at too much, too up close. And something happened to my mind, my heart maybe. But with this one, I feel like I got to for me, what's the bedrock is what happens to women and how women carry shame. and how a crime never ends, especially sexual crimes. A crime against a child, we call it trauma, you go for therapy, but that crime survives. No matter how many times a man might go to jail for it, the victim still has it. And this book really, this woman, Cora Berger, you meet her at the beginning just fleeing this sanctuary into the snow, into this blizzard. I look at what happens when a woman loves a man and she finds out that he carries the worst and he's done the worst thing. What do you do with that? Because your heart loves him and your head says, no, leave and go. It's so easy, just walk away. And how do you get the head and the heart to talk? To me, that's where the trauma lies, to put it into language. And then Angel, the younger character, I looked at a woman...
Angel, avenging.
Angel Lamar, she was born long before this book. She just came to me one day. And so Cora turns her anger and her hurt inwards into a kind of very harmful way. With Angel, I just thought, what happens if she's just angry? She's in a fury, like the Greek furies, and she turns it outwards, this avenger.
And reading that, I'm wondering which is the better approach out of the two lesser evils.
You know, when I started this book, I love Angel. She's just taking down anybody who ever harmed her, and I was totally on her side. If you don't be on her side, she'll come after you as well. But I got to the end of the book and I thought both of these women have remained defined by the harm done to them. So I want to do a sequel in which, and this really is a question I don't have an answer to, what do we do with trauma? What would healing look like? How could this amazing young woman, Angel, with all this creativity in how she eliminates people, turn it into something generative, something for herself? So I don't know the answer.
Well, the book ends in a way that suggests a sequel might happen, and I'm very, very glad to hear that it probably is going to happen.
But John, listening to what Margie's saying, what gives me such hope and joy is the extent to which the genre has moved on, the genre of thriller. You know, if you ask, do you read books? Yes, I'm a fan of books. Oh, what do you read? Thrillers. You can feel the kind of droop and the lack of interest. And okay, so you read the embossed book on the aeroplane that you toss away when you get to the other side. And thrillers are so much, the genre of thriller is so much more than that. You can explore so much more than that because it is about exactly these issues of justice and power and how you resolve it for yourself and for others and for your characters. And I think there's so much scope in the writing that when I wrote Cold Sleep Lullaby, which was the first authentic thriller, I hadn't thought of it as a thriller. And it was put in the category of thrillers in exclusive books, and I was a bit put out. I wasn't sure what it was doing there. And then I would be invited to talk on panels with fellow thriller writers. Like you.
No, you can't get
And you were a very good thriller writer. And I was like, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here. I think it's such a wide genre that it encapsulates so much that almost your very first remarks about where does your book sit in the bookshop is almost identifying the problem, that it can't be put into those kinds of boxes.
I mean, I'm reading a series of very academic essays about the thriller and how the thriller has evolved. I'm reading that at the moment, and I've always felt that the thriller is marginalized in a way that many books that are put into that genre don't deserve. The latest James Lee Burke book, which is his 90-year-old successful writer character, Aaron Holland Broussard, and it is the most obviously supernatural of his books. It's not that he sees visions, it's that things from the past, manifestations of evil, present themselves to him in the real contemporary world. And what James Lee Burke is writing about is how evil has a physical manifestation. And if the history of your country is evil, as the wiping out of the indigenous population of America was evil, as the treatment of slaves was evil, as America going to war in Vietnam was evil, those things come back and they surface in the present in real and meaningful ways. And I mean, that's the sort of sense I get from all of your books, whatever, however we might classify them. They're about pain, corruption, moral hurt, and how do we in contemporary times deal with that stuff?
Siphiwe, what you were saying about the post-colonial moment and using a policeman, a man who tries to institute the law, struck me as so interesting because it's like a way of examining how a state might be made up and unmade. And it resonated so much with, I think, what I was trying to do with the novels I was doing, is looking at that. So can I ask? Siphiwe?
No, Margie, you're not.
Sorry. How did it feel to write that character who is so sort of vilified at once, the sort of like people who went to fight and people who stayed behind? How did it feel with that sort of uncertainty, moral uncertainty of that position?
So I think for me, the saving grace is that he actually is so invested in doing right that he doesn't see the gray area that he's in. So that comes from another character looking at his life and saying to him, you've existed your whole life in this gray area. I like gray areas. I think as former settler colonies, that's all we inherit, right? We created a black and white world and we inherit the gray area. And I think how we navigate that is what's important. And I don't necessarily believe in finding the line. I think, it's to find the conversations, to find the things we can talk about, to find the ways forward, to do the work, which I think we don't do. So he is doing the work. I think that's what I liked about him. He is, his grandfather and it's a very drastic example, but his grandfather and his father were both sort of like hanged for what they did. So one of them fought against the British and the other one did something that he was seen as a crime at the time, or was then,
He got too close to a white woman while delivering flowers, and of course people believed the white woman who made her husband happy by saying that the black man had approached her with indecent intent, and so hanged by the neck.
Yes, until they were dead. So, it's when you inherit something so violent, it's so easy just to be angry, and I think anger and outrage are very easy emotions to arrive at. I think for me, what I liked about Spokes is that he was trying to move beyond those easy emotions and find a way to coexist. And I think this is the hard work we all have to do, and I think it's the hard work we're all very reluctant to do, let me put it that way. And so I think I liked him because he was showing me as a writer a way forward, right? And I did like that. So I liked what he was doing in the novel, and it allowed me to think through a lot of things, and I like it when characters can sort of like give back that way, yeah.
I mean, Andrew Ndlovu, who is the leader of the heist gang, and as you say, following on Heat, you shouldn't root for him because he's doing things which lead and have led to death, to murder, to ugly murder. Is there such a thing as beautiful murder? Probably not. But at the same time, and this goes back to the kind of country that Ndlovu was born into, where his opportunities to put his very real intellectual and human gifts to better purpose, those choices are not available to him, as they are not available to a heck of a lot of people in this country. So, one doesn't want to glorify crime, but at the same time, one has to have a sense of the propulsive forces which put people like Ndlovu, who could quite easily be mayor of Cape Town or a specialist surgeon or whatever the case, if he'd had, if his life had taken different turns. I think that's an important part of the moral ambiguity that we've been talking about on the stage.
I don't think that his values are any different to anybody else's, to the characters we like, to ourselves. I think his values are good and decent, and hopefully he is recognizable in us, and he resonates with you. But circumstances have put him in a particular position where he had to make choices. And yes, he justifies them by saying, well, it's not anybody's money. So this is money that is in transit between banks or from ATMs to banks. And so, the justification is, well, nobody actually owns this money, and it's insured anyway by, white monopoly capital. So it's going to get paid out. No one's really going to get hurt so long as we don't shoot the security guards. It's almost a victimless crime. And that's the way that he justifies it to himself. And it's not a hollow justification either. I mean, as I said earlier, it's a justification we all have when we watch a movie in which bank money is being taken or a work of art is being stolen by Tom Cruise.
Or when we take a ream of A4 paper out of the office.
Yeah, yeah.
Why would you do that?
John, I'm disappointed.
Because I work for a global media megalith. They won't miss it.
But I mean, at the moment, because I'm a cop, I'm on all these emergency WhatsApp groups and other groups. At the moment, in the Western Cape this morning, we're in the middle of a taxi violence crisis that's blocked the end to the R300. Nyanga is shut down. Khayelitsha is a red zone as we speak. Why that happened is that yesterday, Metro law enforcement impounded 100 taxis. Last night, the taxi owners met, and they were outraged. And they said, but this is our means of business. And yeah, there might be minor traffic infringements, but what about the price fixing that we're seeing at the moment with all the insurance companies? What about the tax that hasn't been paid? What about state capture? What about we are the small fish in all of this. We're trying to survive, and this is outrageous. And so today they went to the trenches, and stones are being thrown and buses are being burnt, and the point is being made. Now, it's a crime, undoubtedly, and it's disrupted the entire city, and many of us get annoyed with the amount of taxi violence we have to deal with. But there's an imperative there that is, how many people does the taxi industry employ? Thousands. It gets millions of people to work every day. So it is a gray area. It is not clear whether you're a police officer, whether you're a lawyer, or whether you're an author. You've got to explore all of those grey areas.
I want to go back to sort of power and justice, two words that are in the theme of this session. And all of you, as authors, have power. You have the power to determine what happens to the characters you choose to write about. You have the power to determine where the story goes and whether it finishes with a neatly tied bow or in an open-ended way. And I'm just interested to know, because there are other levels of doing justice. So you do justice to your story, you do justice, you try to do justice to the themes that underlie that story, you try to do justice to your characters, you try to do justice to your readers, you try to do justice to your grandmother and the storytelling skills that she passed on to you. So I sort of wondered, and I've been told by so many authors that I've interviewed over the 30-odd years that I've been interviewing authors, that there's very little, particularly the good books, so the non-Jeffrey Deaver books, that there's an organic...
Note to self.
There is an organic movement, and that the characters take you over, the story takes you over. So you probably don't think about all of these levels of justice that are implicit in the authorial process, forgive that phrase.
Well, I did a very direct interaction with justice around the Eye of the Beholder, because there has been a long gap, but the book didn't sell. It didn't get bought by a publisher until the Me Too movement happened, and then that happened, and bang, it sold immediately. And one of the reasons, I think, was that what the latest iteration of Me Too saw two different things. So one was that brutality and perpetrators just got away with it. The most obvious ones are Kelly, Harvey Weinstein, Prince Andrew, we know Bill Cosby, all of those sorts of ones that we know of. And I was trying to think, why did this book sell so immediately after Me Too? And I was thinking, it's not because I was saying anything different or women were saying anything different. It was that moment, that shift in power, meant that people could hear. The sort of earplug of injustice got removed, and suddenly the complexity of what women were saying. And what was so striking of so many of the cases was the complexity of the messiness, that these are grown-up women with confused and complex and interesting lives who had carried this stuff. So there was a shift in the auditory system of the world, in a way which the book could then kind of go into. So there's an interesting interplay with how things are in the world and with what you write under a kind of a compulsion. Because with this book, this is to do with the writing again. I had written a sixth Claire Hart called Teacher's Pet, which those of you who are rocket scientists in the audience, which is all of you, will understand would have been about, abuse of schoolgirls, and it was about production of pornographic images and stuff. I wrote the whole book, and I thought I had my lovely Claire Hart with her wide open feminist eyes, but I thought all I'm doing is replicating this crime of looking. So it took me a long time to find a way of writing a story about images that steal the soul, and if I can put it like that, without ever seeing the pictures, which was very complicated to do. But then it fitted in, there was a shift of justice. I do think Me Too shifted something in how we understand. Now we're getting the backlash, I think, a bit, but they do talk to the world, books, and the world
so
talks to
your
books.
primary sort of, I'm suggesting there's a ranking, which there's not necessarily the case, but one of the primary forms of justice that you're seeking is to explain to a now, at least temporarily, listening audience just how bad this shit is and has been and continues to be for women. But that doesn't mean that the characters and the story are subordinate to that, because that's the strength of good books. All of that comes together.
I'm a bit with Mark Twain, where he said, if you have a message, send Western Union, use Western Union. No, I wanted to explore this long duration of crime and how women still, it's very much about a mother, Cora, and her daughter, Freya, and then this other daughter who sort of becomes her kind of honorary daughter in a way, this very damaged girl, about how women keep going, they keep loving their children, but then you've got this intergenerational trauma of a mother taking care of her daughter who watches her mother all the time, knowing there is a hand grenade inside her, and her mum's lost, she's disassociated it. So how does that play out? What happens if we don't work it out? So it was more to understand how we carry on.
Do you have any sense of a ranking of doing justice to the various things that the good authors, the great authors, do justice to? Characters, story, time, audience. You just write a story.
Yeah, and I was laughing when you said, authors have power, because I've never felt as an author that I actually have power when I'm writing. I feel like the characters have all the power. My job is to listen and then, do as I'm told. It's a very wonderfully powerless feeling, actually. It's like letting go and just watching what happens, which usually in real life you cannot really do, especially if you're an adult. But as an author, I think you can really just see how it all plays out, and that's the beauty of it. Yeah.
So that your primary power is the power you have to give voice to the characters who tell you what you...
There you go, yeah.
Okay, Andrew?
I like the power of manipulating other people's characters. As you know, I like to put Dion Meyer's Benny Chrysel in my book. And that gives me endless pleasure, because then I can mess around with him. So in Heistman, Eberhard meets Benny Chrysel in a coffee shop, and Benny uses saccharin, doesn't put sugar in his coffee. Dion Meyer's like, what the hell's with the saccharin? Well, it's like he's losing weight, he's looking good.
It's a comment on the emotional tone of your books, Dion.
Oh, exactly. I said, don't mess with me, I'll make him come out of the closet or do something. So that's real power. But on a more serious note, I think something as a white male writer in South Africa has troubled me and yeah, intrigued me since the very beginning of my writing. And that is, what can I write? Whose story can I write? And I'm still not sure that I understand the answer to that for me myself. In The Heisman, Valencia is gay woman of color. Now, she's a very important character to me. I think she's a very important character in the book. I like the way that I've dealt with her, but I haven't delved too deeply into her as in terms of her choices, her pain, what it's like to be a gay woman of color in the South African police force, in 2022. Because I'm not sure that it's my story to tell, and I'm not sure that I can tell it. I run the child abuse unit at Red Cross Children's Hospital. I think I understand child abuse. But I don't think it's my story to tell. I don't think I can write a book about a survivor, a child abuse survivor. Maybe I can, I'm not sure. I'm just not sure who.
Somebody has to.
Yeah, that's why I wrote in Yenzi.
Ideally, people who have been through that will tell their stories, and increasingly they are telling those sorts of stories in various fora.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's as a reader, I mean, if Andrew Bryan wrote a book only about middle-aged, university-educated white men, I'm not sure
it's not good.
Interesting
it's not sounding good, even as you articulate it, John.
I mean, one of the things I think that genre fiction certainly gave me, and I think maybe everyone who was writing it is very much a form which is about the outside. So it's about the spaces in between people. And when I first started writing, I just thought my my investigator character, my cop character, were the only people who could move in real life. Those are cops and journalists can go from the poorest informal settlement to the president's cocktail party legitimately. So it was like the job of the person took them all around. And much of genre fiction is writing about interactions between people. So what you're saying about your character Valencia, the form is not dependent on sort of interior reach or a kind of internal mode. You can infer it from what the person does. So I found it a very revelatory form of using it as a form of asking my questions, which were similar questions to what we all had when we started this terrible wave of anti-intellectualism.
But Siphiwe, when you wrote History of Man, I mean, that's a white Afrikaner, and you somehow inserted yourself into his...
I mean, Emile Coetzee, who is the sort of, if you like, the central character of the previous book, and who is a central character in this book because he disappears. He walks into the bush, and there were 2 leopards and a lion lurking around the tall elephant grass. And by the end of the book, we still don't know what happened to him. There are various people, there are lots of theories. But, I mean, just the verisimilitude, that is how you say it, Margie? Yeah.
Verisimilitude. I don't know. I can't say
I mean, to pick up on what you said, it's extraordinary. Emile Coetzee is an absolutely fully rounded creation, absolutely credible.
I think for me, it's never been like a question of like what. So I think most of us get caught up in the what and who, because it's like who gets to tell whose story. That's for me, that's not the primary question, it's why. You're right. Like, why are you telling the story? And like he just said, like John just said, you're not going to write about, Andrew Brown everywhere, So every character you write is not you. Minor character, major. So like, we get caught up on who the major character is, but usually if that character exists in a world, you're already writing otherness in the different characters that they interact with. And I think the why are you writing this character, why are you telling the story is so much important than, who are you to tell this story? I think because of where we come from and the histories of where we come from, it is an important question to ask, but I think sometimes we then start silencing another perspective, or, you know, so that becomes dangerous, right? Because creativity is just that, and fiction is just that, right? And the ability to write should be a freeing thing. It should not be something that closes us in. So when it came to writing Amilkizia, I wanted to tell the story about colonial Rhodesia, and I felt like a white man was the best way to tell that story. And, you know, I wasn't gonna question about, you know, I'm black and female, and, you know, it was things to think about, but definitely not things to stop me from writing.
Yeah. Nice. We will now go to questions. Yeah, Margie was talking about how the journalists can navigate from one area to another. I remember in late 1990 when the townships were aflame, and I picked up a Canadian journalist at Jan Smuts Airport, as it was then, and we went to Alexandra Township where there were pitched battles between the comrades and the hostel dwellers, and we were ducking bullets, and a bullet passed about, I reckon it must have passed a couple of meters over Joan's head, and she was completely and utterly terrified. And then we drove 7.6 kilometers up Louis Botha Avenue, as it was called then, to St. John's College, and there were 22 young white men dressed in white playing cricket. And Joan was just, wow, what is this country? I wish we had an answer to that. Questions from anywhere? Okay, there's a hand up. Do we have a mic? Yes, we do. Okay, and then you've got the one in front there. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. I love one of the threads that was sort of through that conversation about the way that we're increasingly recognised how prolonged trauma is, that, you know, it's not something that happens and you just get over it and move on. It's a lifelong thing. And I wanted to ask Andrew, please, with his lawyer's hat on, in what way, if at all, do you feel that the law is accommodating that? Because it's an incredibly grey area, and the law changes slowly. Do you feel that in any way there's a recognition of that within the law as it, you know, as the legal system as it currently stands? Thank you.
I think my greatest concern about law, and it's not about South African law, because I believe we have a superb constitution and an excellently functional judiciary. But despite that, my fear about law and the judicial process is that it is a re-trauma, that it's exactly the opposite of what we were hoping it would be, which is a catharsis, an amelioration, a healing. That's what we imagine the legal process to be. And almost inevitably it's not. And the process of cross-examination, the process of giving evidence, of just going to court and seeing the perpetrator, all of those things are retelling the story again. But I don't know how else to do it. I don't know what the other alternative to that is if you want justice in a legal sense to follow a process that is fair and that gives everybody a chance to be represented, to have a say, to question the evidence that is being given. But not wearing my lawyer's hat, wearing my police hat, working in the child abuse unit, we're taking traumatized children who've been through unimaginable trauma and abuse. I'm terrified about taking them to court. I know that I must. There's a perpetrator who needs to be stopped. But I also know what this child is going to go through and will carry for the rest of their lives. So I don't think there's a clear answer to your question. I think it's a process we need. I think it's critical to our idea of law and order and justice in a legal sense. But it is a traumatizing process, and I'm not sure how to avoid that. You know, Weinberg has got an amazing sexual offences court where children can, and any adult victim can give evidence behind closed doors. There's video. So they're counsellors, they're social workers. So there are things in place to try and make it an easier process. But ultimately, it's going to be a renewed trauma. And it is, as Margie says, it's going to last a lifetime.
How much, there's a quick follow-up question before we go to the next one there. How much should our parole system accommodate the trauma of the victims? Oscar Pistorius is asking the courts to force correctional services to give him a parole hearing. How much should Reeva Steenkamp's family's trauma factor in that decision, the continuing refusal of the government to consider paroling Janusz Walus, for example. And there's a family trauma and there's a national trauma because of Chris Hani, who was killed. So how much would that be a factor weighing in on these sorts of decisions?
It is a factor and should be a factor. I've actually attended parole board hearings on the behalf of families to argue against parole being granted, and invariably it's taken seriously by the parole board, and it is definitely one of those factors. I'm not sure to what extent parole, somebody being released early, is also re-traumatizing. I think in some ways it might be, because it's our judicial system and our society saying, well, you've served half your sentence, that's good enough. You can come back out again. It wasn't, almost in a sense, it wasn't that serious that it justified what you got given. So, having said that, as you know, John, I'm somebody who was given a second chance. I was sentenced for 3 years direct imprisonment in Pollsmoor for political offences, and 2 judges gave me a break and said, well, we'll see what you can do with your life. And for that, you know, I could not be more grateful. So there's a personal angle to it too.
Next, please. And we've got there was a hand up there earlier. And then there's one a little lower down.
Hi, this is a question for Siphiwe. What I'm very interested in is sort of reversal of roles where where victims become aggressors. This whole New Age thing where you basically are told how to think, and international mainstream media pummels these issues where China's the bad guy, Putin's the bad guy, and America's telling the whole world how to behave. So how do you feel as a black woman in South Africa who's not South African, who's Zimbabwean, who's possibly getting a lot of flack from that point of view? How do you feel here looking at the government right now and saying, well, are they really doing a good job, or is this now a role reversal where the victims have become the oppressors? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I actually don't know, because it's so complicated, and I think, again, this is something that needs active work. I think most of the times we just find ourselves acting, and I think, you know, something like Operation Dudula. So I actually live in Zimbabwe, and I only come to South Africa occasionally. But something like Operation Dudula, for me, is a very ahistoric thing, right? Because we are basing our understanding of ourselves and who we are on borders, like on what's within a border, right? And not necessarily the history of the region that we come from. And so for me, there's a lot of, in an interesting way, a way of erasing the past 100 years, 150 years of this region's history, which is way more interconnected than we think of as nations, right? Not just, I'm Ndebele, so my people originally came from KwaZulu-Natal. So there's a way in which, when we think of coming to South Africa, it's not coming to a new country, right? There's a way in which in Zimbabwe itself we are marginalized because we are a minority group. So it's, you start asking yourself, so where do we belong? We don't belong there anymore. We don't belong here anymore. So again, these are like very difficult questions, because there's actually someone trying to find a place to belong, but they're not belonging anywhere. And there are borders that are made or are porous for whatever reason. There are governments on both sides not doing much to stop that, So it's difficult to blame, or it's difficult to say, for instance, the governments are just retaliating or doing something bad. I think it's a complicated thing to inherit what we've inherited as countries. Like, I think colonialism was a system, yes, but it was a very particular kind of system. And to inherit that and to try and do something different with it is very difficult, and it's a lot of work. And I think, you know, I think nations haven't been built since we got independence. I think we have countries with people in them, and we have to try and build that sense of nationality and nationhood. That's the first thing, and that comes from real conversations and a lot of hard work. Before we start saying, you know, who's doing what and what's happening, I think we need to just try and have a sense of who are we. And I think that has to be, for me, maybe this is a very personal thing, a very regional question and not a very nationalist question. It's who are we as a region, given the shared history that we have over the past 400 years.
We will have time for one more question. So okay, well, don't wait for a mic. Oh, you've got a mic.
Thanks for a wonderful talk, everybody. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, I went to the launch of the 10 Years in Joburg Blinded City one by Matthew Willem Solomon, and I asked him this question, which I think I can ask you guys, which is like, where do you find your peace, personally as a writer, when you're attracted and kind of drawn to stories of unutterable violence and like the worst of humanity and so forth? Because it's something that I can't do. I would never be able to write these subjects because having to go back to the grindstone of these stories would end me as a creative person. So where do you find the distance to write those things?
It's going to have to be a quick answer each.
I just wanted to say quickly, in the worst of humanity is actually where you find the best. So you see an absolutely horrendous murder or assault, but what you also see is somebody gathering that person into their arms and continuing. So in some ways, the sort of resilience of the spirit and of the human body is what you find in that sort of comfort. It might be the comfort of strangers, but also what you're doing as a writer, or what I'm doing, is you go into the worst. Violence obliterates all aesthetics, all feeling, all language. And I feel this is what I'm doing, is restoring language and order and beauty into something that was stolen from somebody. So it's difficult, but you're restoring, you say, no, this is human, a person was here, a person suffered. So it's a kind of restoration. And I've seen the greatest kindness in some of the most awful situations that I've been in and seen other people in. So it's both.
Andrew?
In the arms of my partner.
And
John.
I'm very glad he's not embroidering on that. Siphiwe, would you?
I'll go with Margie on this one. I think it is sort of the finding that restorative thing and telling the story, right? In bringing back, giving back something. I think that's it, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming. These are the three books: The Eye of the Beholder by Margie Orford, Heist by Andrew Brown, and The Quality of Mercy by Siphiwe, Gloria, and Ndlovu. Buy them, and I'm sure they'll have copies of previous books, and buy those too. Make their wrists sore from all the signing they have to do, which they will do now. Thank you for coming.